All right, well, thank you all for being here. Wow. So first, I want to thank my SCP family, really all of you from the bottom of my heart, each and every one of you. I have been really overwhelmed by the support and encouragement this year, really from the time actually that I was first elected. You have offered so much in terms of your help and your words of encouragement and just showing up, which I am really, truly grateful for. Uh, I want to acknowledge the support that so many people have given me over a number of years. I have to mention Aisha Chief Chi, who was a faculty member at Purdue where I did my graduate program and just really encouraged and inspired me from the very beginning and was actually very instrumental in getting me connected in APA, in SCP, and even with the National Multicultural Conference and Summit, which I hope to see you all at in January. She was just always really encouraging, and so I appreciate that. Dr. Sharon Bowman, who can't be here today, is another person who I met at the Great Lakes Regional Conference when I was a student, and she has encouraged and supported me ever since. She was my mentor in the board certification process. And agreed to review my materials and sit with me and meet with me with such patience and grace. And if you know Sharon, you know that that's her. So I'm really grateful for that, and I want to thank her. I want to also express deep gratitude to Michael Mobley and Mary O'Leary Wiley, who I really connected with very early on when Michael was president and allowed for me to participate in his presidential initiative. And then this year, he was helping with my presidential initiative. So it was kind of full circle and a beautiful moment. And so I want to thank him for that. I want to also acknowledge everyone that helped with the presidential initiative. I'm going to tell you all about it. And wow, I mean, these groups have worked so hard and poured their heart and their soul into this work. And I'm just so deeply grateful. So along with Michael Mobley is the amazing Kimberly Burdine, my really good friend and psychology sibling, Carlton Green, the fierce and amazing Della Mosley, our president-elect Mel Wilcox. I saw her somewhere, now I lost her. There she is. Who I feel like I've really grown up with in SCP, and the incomparable Annalise Singh, whose presidency inspired me and really set this division on fire in the best ways possible. So thank you. I also want to thank Drs. Miriam Jernigan-Nuesi and Dr. Janet Helms and Drs. Carlton Green, again, who really made themselves available to support me and the work of this division, even after their consultation work had ended. And I've learned so much from them, and I really am a better psychologist because of it. So thank you. The entire SCP leadership team, all of the executive board, all of the leaders across our boards and committees, I really am grateful to you, to especially the cabinet, Helen and Amy. I mean, honestly, to sit beside you all week by week and just have your support and your encouragement that was both professional and personal really meant a lot. The text messages, do you need anything? We're here, assign us, we're ready, take care of yourself. I just am so grateful for that. And we really could not do this work without Debbie and Celeste. AMC Source, you guys, honestly, they are running the things behind the scene, and all of your hard work and your dedication and your commitment and everything that you do allows us to lead and to do what we're doing. So I am immensely grateful for you and could never have done this year without you. So let's give it up. I also want to say that my family is here, and I'm so excited for you to see them and for them to participate in this. My mom, Jeanette, is right here, my sister, Naisha, my niece, Amara, my nephew, Zayd, my brother-in-law, Khalil, my partner, husband, Daryl, is back there in the back, rocking our son, Elisha, to sleep, which is good. We need nap time right now, so thank you for that. And I want to say, you know, Daryl told me years ago that I was going to be SCP president. He's very, very excited that he called it, right? And I laughed when he said that, said, no way, that's not going to happen. And then here we are. So I do want to thank you, Daryl, for always believing in me and encouraging me, even when I didn't necessarily see it myself. And to my sweetest baby boy, Elijah, who some of you might have heard him doing a karaoke song at the start of this. He was up here singing Lovely Day by Bill Withers. It was very beautiful. We have it on recording, so we could send that out. And he just gives joy on a daily basis and really when I need it most. So I want to thank my family. So it has been an honor to serve as the 2022-2023 SCP president for Division 17 of the American Psychological Association. To be an early career Black woman president of our professional home is deeply meaningful to me, and I believe reflective of SCP leaders' vision and goals over many years now. I am a Black, relatively young still, cisgender woman whose religious beliefs, educational background, physical abilities, and citizenship status allow me to operate with privilege at times, and yet also remind me that no amount of privilege protects me from the anti-Black racism that exists in our world. My identities have shaped my experience in life and within our profession. They are deeply rooted in my presidential initiative, which is dismantling anti-Black racism with unapologetic boldness, redefining our values and living them out loud. They are also the underpinnings of the perspective that I'm going to share today. And so if you will, please allow me to share a little bit about my experiences in the world and how they influence my work as a counseling psychologist and as your current SCP president. I was raised by my mother, who is a staunch activist, who instilled in me the importance of fighting for what's right, for using my voice to make change, and for supporting others in doing the same. My mom is a retired high school social studies teacher, and she has done a lot of things in her career, one of which was to raise money for her students to go on field trips to participate in mock trial. She did this because she believed not only in teaching the law, but also teaching people, especially young people, how to use their voice to challenge laws, propose new laws, advocate for themselves, and overall to fight for justice. Watching my mother use every resource that she had to so generously uplift other people has always been inspiring to me and has truly shaped the way that I understand and approach the world. I had the opportunity to experience the beauty of being Black from my mother. It may have been the many summers that my older sister and I spent in her hot, unair-conditioned classroom, putting up bulletin boards that always included displays of Black excellence and Black pride for us to take in and to internalize. It may have been the years of celebrating Kwanzaa and talking about the ways in which we internalize and exhibit the principles. It may have been many things because she really showed me the most beautiful expressions of culture and tradition. And I grew up understanding that even when the world says and attempts to show otherwise, being Black is a blessing and something to love. And I do love it. And I love everything about it. I love Black joy. I love Black pride, Black excellence, Black people. I love it all. And really, I love watching TikTok videos about our culture as Black people. So recently, I have been watching TikTok videos and engaging in deep belly laughter and joy, watching these video threads of people engaging around the shared similarities of growing up in Black households. For example, videos where people are asked the question, what do you do with the grocery bags when you are finished putting away all the groceries? Well, one by one, each person says something to the lines of, I ball it up, I put it in a larger grocery bag that's full of other grocery bags that I keep under the kitchen sink or in the kitchen pantry or in another kitchen closet. Basically, I'm saving them for whatever I could possibly need. Well, mine are in the kitchen closet. Also hilariously are the videos where Black people are asked, what's inside of this tin, which is a round blue Royal Dansk Danish butter cookie tin that the interviewer shows a picture of. And again, one by one, each person provides an answer that reflects various things like buttons, hair ties, barrettes, beads, maybe even loose change. Really, it's anything except the Danish butter cookies that are pictured on that tin. And that really is the right answer. These videos are a welcome source of entertainment and joy as I cry laughing, saying, those are my people. These videos are more heartwarming than the heart-wrenching videos of the past decade, where Black people have been chased, brutalized, killed, and where I've watched with tears and sadness saying, those are my people. I completed my doctorate in counseling psychology from Purdue University, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana. And I spent my years at Purdue really involved in the Black Graduate Student Association, BGSA, and those were my people. They were really my saving grace in a place away from the overt and sometimes really scary anti-Black racism that I experienced in the city surrounding my school. In BGSA, we organized cookouts and game nights. We laughed together. We studied together. We celebrated every success together. And we also had to organize together. And we wrote letters together about the racial injustices and oppression that we experienced. We supported each other as we tried to complete a doctoral level education while also experiencing racism, discrimination, oppression, and trauma from many levels of the world around us. And we even marched together. I remember the last march during my time in Indiana, right before I left for internship in Boston. The year was 2012, and a Black young 17-year-old boy by the name of Trayvon Martin had just been shot and killed by George Zimmerman. I remember our pain and our sorrow that day. The following year, in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman, Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 Black women activists who set out to make the world see the humanity of Black people and to create change. They have defined Black Lives Matter as an ideological and political intervention in a world where Black lives are systemically and intentionally targeted for demise. It's an affirmation of Black folks' humanity, our contributions to society, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. My entry into the field as a counseling psychologist was birthed alongside the Black Lives Matter movement. That same year, I transitioned from being a student to being a licensed psychologist, a supervisor, a more clearly identified mentor, and more. And that had meaning for me in terms of my responsibility to use my power and my privilege as an example of the type of counseling psychologist that I wanted to be. I came to counseling psychology because our counseling psychology values are aligned with the kind of healing and transformation that we need in our society. I connected with counseling psychology's aspiration to be advocates and focus on social justice in a time where we deeply, deeply needed it. And because of what my mother modeled, which was to teach, to learn, and also to do something. Because of all of this, counseling psychology was simply the right fit for me. And so when I graduated and I entered our profession, I did so with determination to make change across the ecological levels that I have been learning about. I spent the first several years of my career trying to understand how do we actually actualize our social justice value and advocacy efforts in a way that acknowledges and acts upon the racial trauma that's all around us, and in a way that allows our Black counseling psychology students and colleagues to know that we see them and that we understand that Black is indeed a blessing and that they should be celebrated. I engage as a counseling psychologist and really as a person guided by the Ngozi Saba 7 principles of Kwanzaa, which I learned and practiced with my mother. They are Umoja, which is Swahili and means unity and is about the practice of togetherness, not only in our family, but also in our communities. Ujima, which means collective work and responsibility, and is about building community to solve our collective problem. Kujijakalia, which means self-determination, and is about defining ourselves, naming ourselves, creating for ourselves, and speaking for ourselves. Ujamaa, which means cooperative economics, and is about building our own, but profiting together. Nia, which means purpose, and is about making the building and developing of our community our work and having the intention of that work be the restoration of our people to their traditional greatness. Kumba, which means creativity, and is about doing all we can to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited it. and Imani, which means faith, and is about believing with all our hearts in our people and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. This is a part of the foundation of how I show up in this field. This is how I respond to the racial trauma that is around us, and this is how I engage as your SCP president. Over the past decades, we've seen countless Black and Brown people murdered through state-sanctioned and individual violence. Each one painful, each one sparking outrage, and each one leaving us with the question of what will we do next? There are too many atrocities to name, but because I really do believe in the power of saying their names, I'm gonna remind us of a few. And these had lasting impressions on my understanding of what I needed to do as a counseling psychologist. And I'll give you a sneak preview. I understood that we needed to dismantle anti-Black racism in all of its forms. So first was the 2014 murder of Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old Black child who was killed in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, when a white police officer, Timothy Loman, arrived at the park where Tamir was sitting alone under a gazebo with a toy gun. The officer shot Tamir within a matter of seconds of stepping out of the car. Second was the 2015 death of Sandra Bland, a 28-year-old Black woman and the sister of one of my college acquaintances. Sandra died in police custody after being pulled over for not using a blinker to change lanes. Police said that she completed suicide in 3 days, in jail 3 days later, but her family, like so many of us, never believed that. Third was the 2015 mass murder of 9 Black people at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Reverend Clementa Pinckey, Cynthia Hurd, Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Tawanza Sanders, Ethel Lance, Susie Jackson, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Reverend Daniel Simmons, and Myra Thompson welcomed a white man named Dylan Roof into their Bible study. And they sat with him and they prayed with him, not knowing that he would begin shooting them because of his belief that Black people were taking over the country. That evening, I went to my own AME church in Boston, Massachusetts, where I sang on the praise and worship team. And we held a prayer service for our AME brothers and sisters. And I remember wanting very badly to be there and also being completely terrified to go to church because I wondered who would be next. Fourth was the 2020 killing of 25-year-old Black man Ahmaud Arbery, who was out for a run when 3 white men chased him down and shot him to death on the streets of Brunswick, Georgia. I mourned for Ahmaud and his family, and I also felt frozen in the memory of my own experience going out for a run in Indiana as a graduate student and having a truck full of white men slow down next to me and yell racial slurs. Lastly, but unfortunately not really last, in 2020, just 3 months after the killing of Ahmaud Arbery and 2 months after the killing of 26-year-old Black woman Breonna Taylor, a 46-year-old Black man by the name of George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when white officer Derek Chauvin kneeled on his neck for almost 10 minutes. These anti-Black racial traumas stay in our mind and in our bodies and in our hearts. These are the traumas that are connected generationally to the United States' history of dehumanizing and devaluing Black people's lives. These are the traumas that make me see that we need to be guided by the principles of Umoja, which is unity, of Ujima, which is collective work and responsibility, of Nia, which is purpose, and of Imani, which is faith. These are the traumas that show up for me and that I think that we must uproot to end anti-Black racism. And if you're feeling anything like I am inside of my body, then I invite you to take a deep breath right there. Uprooting racism in general is not actually new to us. Over several years, counseling psychologists have spoken and written about the importance of uprooting and acting against racism. Just a couple years ago in her 2021 address, SCP President Mary O'Leary Wiley reminded us that our SCP leaders over decades, including past presidents Dr. Rosie Phillips Davis, Melba Vasquez, William Parham, Janet Helms, and Sharon Bowman, have helped our organization to increase its awareness of both individual and systemic racism. SCP past President Michael Mobley also helped SCP to think about our commitment to social justice, specifically as advocacy and action against racism. And our focus on racism has been clear, and it has been important for this division for a long time now. And our focus now on dismantling anti-Black racism is also clear and important and imperative for everything else that we are going to do. And to be clear, our focus on dismantling anti-Black racism specifically doesn't mean we don't have other dismantling to do. We do. We need to dismantle classism and sexism and xenoprejudice and homo prejudice and trans prejudice and anti-Semitism, racism overall, oppression in all its forms, and more. But because our society is deeply rooted at our foundation in the dehumanization, oppression, and violence towards Black people, our dismantling has to have that foundation as well. And it has to be clear about naming it as such. So let me name it. Aligned with Jones's levels of racism, I define anti-Black racism as a system where racism is directed at Black people through individual beliefs, institutional policies and practices, and societal systems that continue to harm and oppress Black people. Anti-Black racism or anti-Blackness has also been understood as a system of beliefs and practices that attack, erode, and limit the humanity of Black people. And as deliberate, entrenched efforts to ensure Black subordination. I firmly believe that anti-Black racism is not only detrimental in it being externally directed at Black people, but it is also really destructive in becoming internally manifested in all of us. Anti-Black racism is not just something that is happening far away out there in society, in the tragedies and violence that I described a few moments ago. We swim in the water of anti-Black racism without even knowing that it's surrounding us. So it would be impossible for anti-Black racism to exist out there in the world and not in our own division or even within ourselves. Last year, 2022, SCP President Dr. Amy Reynolds reminded us that SCP's prior request for consultation to dismantle anti-Black racism was really based in the understanding that SCP was not absolved from it, and that Black people experience harm in SCP, and that we want to do something about that. One of the harms of anti-Black racism is placing silence over it and around it. And we do this in different ways in society, in our division, in our workspaces, in our personal conversations. For example, not naming anti-Black racism for what it truly is putting silence to it. Not being willing to discuss it because it's uncomfortable or personally unfamiliar is putting silence to it. Engaging in whataboutisms to broaden the conversation, which one could argue allows for more inclusivity, which we do strive for in general, but is also happening at the expense of invalidating and ignoring the anti-Black racism that a person is trying to convey, that is putting silence to it. 2 years ago, SCP leaders embarked on a process to better understand how this occurs in our structure and in our ways of operating within SCP. We asked the question of how anti-Black racism shows up in SCP, and with consultation work of our counseling psychology colleagues from Jernigan and Associates, we really began to answer that question. Through community conversations and small group meetings and interviews, our consultants learned that Black and non-Black people of color experience and witness anti-Black racism in the counseling psychology spaces that we have, such as in their counseling psychology training programs, in SCP meetings, and in SCP events in other times. We saw that counseling psychology student professionals and our graduated professionals see and appreciate and value this division's focus on anti-Black racism and the work that the division has been trying to do. And we also saw that they wanted to see the meaningful evidence of that change, which I do believe we have been building towards. So I'm proud of the changes that I think SCP has begun to make over the past year. I think that we have been intentional to not only water some of the seeds that prior SCP leadership and colleagues have planted, but also to find new sunlight and room for them to grow. And along the way, we planted a couple seeds of our own. And actually, it's been a pretty busy year of planting these seeds, so I could tell you about it for the next 2 hours, but for the sake of time, I'll just highlight a few. First, I want to discuss the work that has grounded this year, which was the leadership's anti-Black racism training. Second, I will talk about my presidential initiative to define and redefine our professional values with bolder understanding and language that reflect the current work of our division. Third, I will discuss my initiative to live our values out loud and engage in ways that clearly reflect them. And then lastly, I'm going to provide a brief update about how our focus on dismantling anti-Black racism is reflected in our policy changes and the community partnership. So the leadership training. This year, we engaged in a collective anti-Black racism training with an open invitation across our SCP leadership, not just the executive board. The training was designed as a 3-part series, so the training was infused throughout the year and not just a one-time event. It was led by Drs. Jernigan, Nuesi, Helms, and Green, and SCP leadership spent several hours unpacking, discussing, and planning how we could use our positions to do this work. We explored Dr. Helms's white heterosexual male privilege framework, or WIMP, as she calls it for short, as the foundation of this work, as well as her racial identity theory as a conceptual guide for discussions. Dr. Helms makes the distinction that racism is not white heterosexual male privilege, but white heterosexual male privilege, or WIMP, is a tool that maintains racism. It also maintains other forms of oppression, such as transphobia, misogyny, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and more. Dr. Helms explains that WIMP is a privileged status which allows white heterosexual males control over societal resources, as well as power to determine who has access to those resources and what rules have to be followed to get them. She noted that society socializes everyone to adhere to whiteness rules simply because one exists in environments where whiteness dominates. And so in our leadership team discussions, we identified the ways in which counseling psychology adheres to whiteness simply because it dominated our field from the very beginning. One of the ways we see WIMP operating is through the avoidance of explicitly naming and addressing whiteness, which I just spoke about. This avoidance allows us to ignore the specific form of oppression that needs to be addressed by softening the oppression with more comfortable terms like multiculturalism and diversity. 3 years ago, in her presidential address, Dr. Singh affirmed that as we strive for multiculturalism, we also must deepen the work of naming whiteness and centering Black liberation for all of us to be liberated. Since then, we have not discarded the terms multiculturalism and diversity, and I'm not actually suggesting that we discard them in years to come. They are important and they have meaning in our division and our work. But I am asking, how can we dismantle anti-Black racism in SCP if we can't even name it specifically? I am asking for unapologetic boldness and being intentional with our language so we can be intentional with our actions. And for full transparency, even as a leadership team, we have wrestled with what it means to do this work. In our SCP mid-year meeting, we struggled with what it means to be specific with that language and intentional with our actions. And the wrestling occurred in a group that's really proudly comprised of Black, non-Black people of color, and our white colleagues. And we had to be open and vulnerable in conversations about what it means to then do anti-Black racist work together. We raised the question of where everyone fits in the action of doing this work. And those conversations were not easy. They required a new understanding of safety, including a question of what safety means, who was safe, and if safety was even our goal, to be honest. The conversations required a willingness on the part of our white and our non-Black people of color colleagues to speak up and share so that our Black colleagues didn't have to carry the conversation and the burden. And we were intentionally shifting from being task-based to relational so that we had room for discussion. Even when we ran out of time for discussion, we actually still prioritized it and continued the conversation because the conversation was critical for us understanding how to move SCP forward. And we worked through this dialogue by challenging what made each of us comfortable and then being willing to get uncomfortable in that conversation because it is a conversation that necessitates discomfort. Through the three-part anti-Black racism trainings, SCP leaders, including those leading the presidential initiatives, which I'm going to speak about next, explored how WIMP is present in the foundation of what has brought so many of us to this specialty, which is our values. And so we deconstructed and thought critically about the language within our SCP values, our statements, and the things that really undergird our understanding of this profession and of our work. We began to identify how WIMP and whiteness are present and what we wanted to do about them. We understood that WIMP's connection to positionality and knowing that positionality influences our division and how our specialty was developed, we began to consider our values in a new light and through different contexts. And I'm also asking our larger SCP community to do just that. The team who led this first initiative of my presidential theme, the initiative was Define and Redefine Our Values. They were courageous and they were bold in taking on this task. Doctors Annalise Singh, Mel Wilcox, Della Mosley, along with the support of our SCP Social Justice graduate assistant, Kaylin Terrell, and many other committee members, began with the theoretical underpinnings of critical race theory, critical psychology, critical consciousness, and liberation psychology as the foundations to guide their work in reviewing our goals. What foundation is that? They reviewed the counseling psychology model training value statements, our traditional counseling psychology values that are on our SCP website, liberation as psychology values, and much more that had descriptions of what we have come to understand as the foundation of our field. And like the leadership team, they applied the WIMP framework, racial identity theory, critical consciousness for anti-Black racism model, to think critically about the explicit and implicit meaning in the ways our values have shared and how we act on them. And lastly, they use popular education techniques to trace construction of our values in our division and how it has developed within the context of the larger society around us. And then they brought this wisdom to our SCP community. So we held a community gathering and it was entitled Envisioning the Values of a Liberated Counseling Psychology. And it was beautiful. They welcomed our SCP members across career stages, students, early career, mid-career, late career individuals. And we got to engage in some deep listening and discussion. We summarized feedback, returned back for more community gatherings, and ultimately were able to present 9 proposed values that Dr. Singh, Mosley, Wilcox, and their entire team reflected on to bring forward. And so I'm going to share those values with you, and I'm going to follow each one with my reflections and hopes for what we'll do with them. And I've ordered them a little bit to how I think they build. And I also want to say that we've continued to have conversation and discussion about these values, and there is more work to do as we work to finalize and bring them to you. But I still want to share with you where we are so far. So the first one is critical consciousness. Can you imagine a value that we have that is critical consciousness? Counseling psychologists think critically about how anti-Black racism and other interlocking oppressions operate in the context that we work. We openly acknowledge what is learned, we teach accurate history, and we engage in self-examination and cultural humility to look at our own biases and practice new ways of engaging for the collective good. And I want to note that this is what we've actually spent the last year doing, really engaging in critical consciousness, because we cannot dismantle systems that we are not actively working to understand. And that's why I think this value comes first. Self-examination and cultural humility are necessities within critical consciousness, because we are a part of the system that we are actively working to disrupt. Prevention is the next value. Counseling psychologists value and center prevention of anti-Black racism and interlocking systems of oppression by continuously examining how anti-Black racism shaped the history of our discipline and by adopting primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention measures in all aspects of our psychology training and work. Our prevention value is really a pillar for counseling psychology. It's a part of the fabric of how we understand our work. And as we engage in prevention to dismantle anti-Black racism and these interlocking systems of oppression, we are not only responding to the anti-Black racism and oppression of the moment, but we are also responding to the systems that perpetuate the continuous racism and oppression. The prevention of anti-Black racism is then tied to the prevention of other oppressive symptoms as well. So our prevention value is central here. Strength-based. This feels like the one we know, right? Counseling psychologists use cultural humility to attend to the well-being of the whole person, including their lived experiences through frameworks that are contextual, intersectional, and strength-based. So similar to that prevention value, our strength-based value is really fundamental here. It's one that I deeply appreciate, and I also want to push us a little bit on. So I would like to see us maintain a strength-based approach, but I would also like for us to have a dismantling attitude. I want us to push to do more than be strength-based for individuals when a system is tearing them apart. So we can and we should take non-pathologizing approaches to the person. We know that, we value that. But we can't do that to the exclusion of addressing the broken and dangerous systems that very much need to be pathologized and torn down that the person is living in, right? So we've got to be strength-based with the dismantling attitude. Advocacy is the next goal. Counseling psychologists are bold in their efforts to dismantle mechanisms and systems and structures of injustice as we engage in advocacy and social justice praxis that involve addressing anti-Black racism and other interlocking oppressions embedded within our own profession. Counseling psychologist advocacy is direct, and it occurs across the individual, institutional, and structural levels, including local, state, and federal policy. The education and training of counseling psychologists, this is my take, must be a place of advocacy so that our trainees of marginalized backgrounds have the same sense of safety in our programs that we're asking them to create with clients in the therapy room. And I'm going to share a little more about that in a minute. Flexibility and adaptability. Counseling psychologists are change agents who work through innovation, collaboration, flexibility, and adaptability as they shape-shift structures that contribute to the oppression and subjugation of marginalized people. I really see this as deeply connected to the advocacy and prevention goals. As the world continues to change, including through technology, communication-based advances, our efforts to create change have got to change too. So we're going to have to be flexible and adaptable with keeping up with the demands of the world so that we can help shape a world that we're envisioning together. Speaking of together, the next value is collectivism. Counseling psychologists honor the collective group that encompasses personal, professional, and societal groups to which we identify with. Counseling psychologists prioritize the sharing of power and engage in collaboration over competition. Our colleagues also noted that building pathways for collective healing is a part of collectivism. I like to add that this value, I think, is about seeing that there is an us while still affirming the importance of the intersections that make up the you. If we are really transforming what we know and working together, then we are really never working alone. We're in community with this. Accountability and repairing harm. Counseling psychologists aim to identify and correct biases at the individual, institutional, and structural levels by taking a self-accountability, acknowledging cultural missteps and harm, especially against marginalized communities, and supporting others in taking accountability and offering paths to reconciliation and reparations where possible. I see this value as deeply connected to critical consciousness and self-examination, where we must first take accountability before we can begin to think about repairing the harm. Our accountability is personal, and it is also communal. So on both levels, we have to examine how we have been direct participants or quiet observers to the harm that has been perpetuated through anti-Black racism. And if we don't continue to examine ourselves and our SCP system, then we won't uproot the deep underpinnings of what keeps us from attaining the restoration and healing that we seek. The next goal is liberation. Counseling psychologists actively work together towards freedom from oppression and for all people. And you maybe could say that this is the first goal. I think I also think about liberation as something where we needed all of these other pieces to really be able to get there, right? So it's central, but there's so much work to do to get to a value and a goal of liberation. The team noted that liberation is a psychological construct that only has meaning when we enact it. And we also have heard that from Dr. Annalise Singh before in her presidential focus. I would add that liberation requires bold movement. And so I call on us as counseling psychologists and aspiring counseling psychologists to do the work of liberation and to not spend time lost in whose liberation comes first, but to remember that we are working together because our liberations are intertwined. And also liberation will only come after the accountability and the repair begin. The last value is healing. Counseling psychologists promote healing of the self. Counseling psychologists promote healing of the self and of others, where we strive to know ourselves first and enhance personal and collective well-being. Counseling psychologists understand that short-term problem management and survival are sometimes necessary, but long-term healing and thriving are the goal. I really appreciate this value, and I think that it connects all of the other values from beginning to end. There is critical consciousness in knowing ourselves. There is collectivism in promoting our healing as individuals and as a collective group. And there is hope and liberation within the possibility of healing and thriving. What I appreciate most about these values is that they are action-based. And even when I think about the work of our SCB president-elect, Dr. Helen Neville, around radical healing, I get excited because I believe these values move us to that work too. And I think that they are well aligned with what's coming next, and that individually and collectively, these values will push us forward to walk the talk. And speaking of walking the talk, the other part of the initiative was living our values out loud. Led by Drs. Carlton Green, Michael Mobley, and Kimberly Burdine, again with the support of our graduate student assistant, Kaylin Terrell, and their entire committee. One of the areas I asked this group to explore was how do our values show up in the process of socialization in our profession? Specifically, I asked them to use unapologetic boldness to challenge the respectability politics and notions of professionalism and begin to really unpack how our views of professionalism can be saturated in implicit and explicit biases that harm our trainees, our faculty, and staff of marginalized backgrounds, particularly Black trainees who have less power than the faculty and staff. And I think that each of the 9 proposed values are relevant to this needed work. For example, we need our critical consciousness value that calls us to engage in self-examination about how anti-Black racism shows up in our training programs. We need accountability and repairing harm values to talk about how we identify and correct the problems through the process of self-accountability. Our advocacy value, which cannot be limited to an idea that we teach our students about, but then punish them when they engage in it for themselves. If we as counseling psychologists are going to be bold in our efforts to dismantle oppressive systems, then we have to be bold in supporting our students to do the same, even if the oppressive system is within our own program. And when they do that, we can't call it unprofessional. Of course, these examples are not limited to our students. Our faculty and our staff are also harmed. We need resources, we need tangible tools for our academic programs and also our training partners so that they can use it to address the harm of anti-Black racism. And this presidential initiative group has begun that work. They've engaged in critical conversation of how professionalism standards uphold anti-Black racism and WIMP. They have used the frameworks of racial identity and critical consciousness that I previously described. And ultimately, they have begun cultivating this really wonderful resource called Black Like Me, which is a series of case studies and discussion guides that can be used to dialogue about reality-based vignettes surrounding the experiences of our Black students, faculty, and staff in counseling psychology programs. These discussion guides are going to facilitate conversations about anti-Black racism, about WIMP, about accountability interventions, about safety and healing. Can you imagine those conversations in our programs, our training, our work, and our SCP spaces? It is our goal that Black and non-Black people of color and white people in power can better support Black wellness in academic training and overall our counseling psychology community. The last very brief piece that I want to bring us back to is that SCP as a society has actually also been trying to live our values out loud through policy, process, and structural changes. So for example, this year, we revisited our rapid response protocol, which was first developed in 2016 following the US presidential election and focused on responding to the subsequent years of dangerous rhetoric and politics that were coming at the national level. The new strategic response protocol that we develop continues that work, but with critical consciousness towards dismantling anti-Black racism and all racism, phobias, and acts of dehumanization, which are the weapons of WIMP. That is the focus of the strategic response protocol. It is responsive to the critical issues of our society, and it also engages with our prevention value. There's a prevention component that involves the continual and collaborative development of resources and tools and action steps that SCP members can use. So even before the next event that requires a response, because we know that the events continue to happen, we will already be gathering resources and writing and engaging the collective SCP community to put those resources out so that you are ready to use them and so that we can use them in preventative ways. And that piece is also our collectivism value. That's living it out loud, that we're really opening and engaging the SCP community. So there will be ways for you all to give feedback and to participate and to help write and to show up in this work together. This year, SCP has also returned to our traditionally held community engagement project, which has always been connected to the city where the APA convention is held. So being in DC this year, we partnered with the District of Columbia Public Schools, or DCPS, and we're hosting an anti-racist book drive, which is actually still going on right now. If you want to contribute, we'll have a slide later. It benefits a local middle school where students are majority 96% Black. It's led by our 2023 SCP Community Engagement Chair, who's also one of our amazing SCP Council reps, Dr. Delisha Pittman. And SCP so far in the 3 weeks since we have launched this has collected over 100 books for this school. We are at a time when critical race theory continues to be challenged. Black history is being wiped from curriculum across education levels, and books about race and identity are being banned from schools and from public libraries. The purpose of this book drive is to support educators in their pursuit of books that affirm the students' connection about racial identity. The purpose of the partnership is also to support and assist educators in developing curriculum to guide and use the books as they desire. And so this book drive really represents another effort to live our values out loud. So in closing, my charge for SCP is to really move forward with unapologetic boldness in our pursuit to dismantle anti-Black racism. As you think about how this work applies to your everyday life, I want to remind you that anti-Black racism is everywhere, and we need you to do the work of dismantling it. We need our white and non-Black people of color colleagues to do this work and to follow the lead of our Black scholars. We need you in your role as training directors, as faculty, as supervisors, to listen to your Black students and your Black colleagues and believe the experiences of anti-Blackness that they contend with in the academic programs, at their training sites, in the communities that surround your institution that they live in and in our society. We need you in your role as practitioner scholars to explicitly name anti-Blackness, to discuss it in the sessions that you have, to discuss it in your interviews, in your research, when you investigate it, for the sake of critical consciousness, for accountability and repair, and ultimately for liberation and for healing. And I need us all to be advocates and to engage in the counseling psychology pillar of being strength-based with the dismantling attitude. This has been the work of your SCP leadership over the past year. It has been the honor of my career to be a part of this. We have an amazing group of people here, intelligent, wise, courageous, warm, forgiving, flexible, supportive, and caring. In many ways, I think that we are the vision of what SCP was asking for years ago. And I invite you to be the vision of what we're asking for today. Thank you.